I'm super excited to get this time with you and to be able to watch you eat. I mean, just what a privilege for me. So we're going to dive right in because I want to value and honor your time. So I lead a ministry called Replenish, and the focus of our ministry is to help leaders pay attention to their soul and live and lead from a healthy soul. And I want to spend some time talking about this topic that is not normally considered like a soul care talk. But I have a lot of passion and interest in this topic. And in fact, I have a growing sense of deep conviction around this. And one reason I feel like the intrigue for this is growing in my life is because, number one, I think it's a huge issue for me personally. Even at 66, managing my technology and devices is a huge issue in my life. I'm also convinced that this has massive implications for the health of your soul. This is not disconnected or unrelated to the health of your soul. Actually, and we're going to talk about this, what technology is doing to us has huge implications for the health of our own soul. By the way, for those of you who are parents, it has huge implications for your kids and how you're raising your families. And then, let me just throw this on top. I think it has huge implications for how we even think about making disciples. So I want to talk about your soul and technology. So having a soul that is at peace, that is in deep relationship with Jesus, requires things and words like space and quiet and stillness and presence and pause and slow. And yet we live in an age where our gadgets are scarfing up every morsel of time and attention in our lives. And so we live in a day where you and I, and this is true of every person in the room, we are easily distracted and our worlds are filled with noise. And so for our own spiritual and emotional and relational health, we have to learn how to manage it. Now, I just want to acknowledge right from the very beginning, I get it. There is an irony that I'm teaching from my iPad, even as I talk about technology. So in the spirit of authenticity, I want to begin with a confession. And here's my confession. Hi, my name is Lance, and I am a technology addict. Thank you. This is the point where you guys say back, hi, Lance, right? Yeah, thank you. And I know I don't, with a smart, intelligent crowd like this, I don't need to convince you of all the benefits of technology, and there are a lot of them. When it comes to managing our daily lives, the education of our kids, even extending the reach of the gospel, monitoring our health, managing our finances, technology has helped us with all of those. So we're experts at managing or at maximizing our technology, but not so much at managing it. We're really good at leveraging technology for our lives, but not so good at limiting it. And so like all good pastors, I have to start with a Bible verse, all right? I couldn't find iPhone in Scripture, but I did find this. So Proverbs 22, the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. And I love the Message paraphrase of this verse because it more colorfully says, a prudent person sees trouble coming and ducks. A simpleton walks in blindly and is clobbered. So according to Solomon, there are two things that make you smart in Proverbs 22. First is smart people look down the road and they can see when trouble is coming their way. Smart people don't bury their head in the sand. Smart people don't take a Pollyanna approach to life. They're not naive. They don't take everything at face value. Smart people are on the lookout for dangerous things. But Solomon says, you're not smart if all you do is see the trouble coming. He says also what qualifies you as smart is that you duck. You get out of the way. You don't put yourself and you proactively step out of harm's way. So you don't get just points for seeing the trouble coming. You only get points if you also learn how to get out of the way. So today, what I want to share with you are some ways that you and I can duck some of the trouble that technology can bring in our lives, and then be proactive to come up with some good solutions. So before we dive into sort of the basic content of my talk, I want to share with you 4 books, Scott already mentioned one of them, that have deeply impacted me. And if you have interest in this topic, I would highly recommend these. Would all be like 5-star recommendations for me. So number 1 is an old book, but if you want to understand how we have emerged and developed in the area of technology, it's called Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, was written in 1985. So it was definitely prophetic and foreshadowing kind of where we find ourselves today, amusing ourselves to death. The second book is called The Shallows, written by Nicholas Carr. And what this was especially helpful for me in was beginning to understand how the brain works when it comes to technology and how neuroscience is validating some of the concerns that we share. Third book is called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. He's a great author, wrote another book called Deep Work, but I love this book. It's very practical on how you manage technology. And then the last one that Scott mentioned is called Stolen Focus. We read this 3 years ago, probably. I was so impacted by it. I went to everyone, both my kids and their spouses and my wife, and I said, I will pay you $50 each if you'll read the book and we can have a family discussion about this. And they all did, and it cost me $250 for us to have a family conversation, but it was so worth it. So let me kind of dive in now. The speed at which technology is advancing and invading our lives is absolutely mind-blowing. So I read an article recently where the author talked about that we've all heard the phrase, the law of diminishing returns. But when it comes to technology, there is really what we now call the law of accelerating returns, because we are using faster tools to build faster tools. And it is advancing at an unbelievable rate. So the reason I bring up this article is because of the last sentence in the article, and here's what it said. We won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It will be more like 20,000 years of progress. And when you sit with that, that is mind-boggling. And think about the progress or the acceleration of the impact of technology just in our lifetime. Do you realize the internet is just a little over half a century old? And yet it completely dominates and consumes our lives. And I think as we sit here on a Sunday afternoon, we get it. Like, we're not going back to a simpler, quieter, slower kind of world. Speed and complexity are here to stay. So how do we deal with it? Well, I want to give you some background and first talk about this issue of how did we get to where we are? And I have found this extremely helpful because in most discussions about technology, the focus is on the content. It's on the information and the words and the images and the videos that the technology delivers. But the technology or the medium itself is usually secondary in the conversation. But Marshall McLuhan warns us not to minimize the impact of the technology itself. Now, here's his statement, and it's a famous prophetic statement from 1964. And his statement was, the medium is the message. So exactly 60 years ago, he was making a statement that was basically saying, as important as it is what you see and what you hear and the words and the images that come across your technology, the technology itself is the big game changer. And so, in fact, I read this quote from McLuhan. He says, societies have always been shaped more by the nature of the media by which men communicate than by the content of the communication. And he walks you through things like the printing press and radio and television and the introduction of computers. That the actual technology has had more impact than the content or information that flows out of the technology. And one of the illustrations that McLuhan uses is a light bulb. Now, he says a light bulb doesn't have any content that it disperses, but it is a technology that has had dramatic social effect. A light bulb enables people to have light where there is darkness, and that is a game changer. And McLuhan says just as a light bulb shows up in society, the light bulb itself changes the environment by its presence. Now, in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Neil Postman gives an interesting example of how the introduction of television changed the world of politics. And there's a well-known illustration of this about a debate, a political presidential debate that took place in 1960 between what would be President Kennedy, soon to be President Kennedy, and President Nixon. Now, prior to this time, political debates were analyzed based on the value and the merit of how well they debated the ideas. It was all about substance. But in 1960, that changed because arriving on the scene was Kennedy, who was young, good-looking, rested, had just been on a recent trip, a vacation to Hawaii, and he shows up at the debate very tanned and good-looking. President Nixon, on the other hand, old, tired, pale, had just come off of being ill, and he's gaunt when he shows up at the debate. And what was interesting is that the surveys afterwards, so this is one of the earliest televised debates in the history of America. Afterwards, they surveyed people. People who heard the debate thought Nixon won. People who saw the debate thought Kennedy won. And what began to be true is that television would shape political debate because now it was more about image than substance. And would you agree that in 2025, it's way more about image than substance, right? McLuhan said, we become what we behold. We shape our tools, and then our tools end up shaping us. So I don't know about you, but for many years, I kind of had this mindset that technology itself was innocuous. But that has proven to be a pretty naive perspective. For years, here's what I believed as a pastor and a Christian leader, that as long as I didn't engage in inappropriate content, technology was only an asset and a benefit. But in recent years, I've been learning that my constant engagement with technology, even appropriate content, can actually be a liability. And I'm sure you can relate to this. I feel it when I try to read my Bible. I have a hard time focusing on any book that I'm reading. I feel it when I reflexively reach for my phone whenever I have 5 spare seconds with nothing to do. Can I get an amen? I feel it when I'm supposed to be having a conversation with my wife and my laptop is open. I feel it when I have this almost Pavlovian response when a text message comes in. To say that we're addicted is not a stretch. And the truth is, here's how it translates. The truth is, I find it increasingly difficult to focus, pay attention for very long, be present in a conversation, have undistracted thoughts, pray, read my Bible deeply, enjoy a quiet drive, or just simply be alone with my thoughts. So here's my other confession. I do not like the way that technology is impacting my life and what it does to me. And like a lot of us, I think we have this sort of love-hate relationship, right? And I think, John Mark Comer talks about this. He says, someday, history books, when history is written, historians will look back on 2007 as an inflection point in the history of humanity. What happened in 2007? Steve Jobs released the iPhone into the world. And it has impacted us in ways that we still cannot fully understand. And neuroscience has definitively shown this. So again, for those of you who are taking notes, I think it'll be up here on the screen, where it says, our brains are literally being reprogrammed by technology. Literally. Neuroscience has helped us to understand. We used to think about your brain like a computer and that it had this hard drive and it was very rigid. But what we've learned from neuroscience is that the brain is far more amazing and adaptable than we ever thought. And because of it, there is a term that's been coined called neuroplasticity, which refers to the fact that your brain has an amazing ability to adapt so that when people go blind, the brain can compensate by sharpening the senses of hearing and touch, and we know that scientifically. But it also can be a curse in the sense that our brains can be reprogrammed in some ways that aren't very helpful. When your brain is constantly stimulated by video games, when your brain is constantly stimulated by Instagram and doom scrolling, your brain changes. So neuroscientists have this statement that goes like this: neurons that fire together wire together. So when you are constantly stimulating the neurons of your brain by the constant access and engagement in technology, those neurons begin to wire together, and what begins to happen is that your brain expects the constant stimulation. Your brain is looking for that short-term dopamine hit when you get a new text message or a new email comes in to your inbox. So we've been on this path. All of us have been pulled along to where technology now dominates our lives. So just so we get a really clear picture of like, where are we in 2025, I want to give you some data that will paint a picture for how much this is consuming us. The average American spends 8 hours every day staring at some kind of screen. Okay, don't let that just, 8 hours a day, you are in front of some kind of a screen. Of those in the age range of 18 to 24, 75% said they check their phone before they get out of bed. 31% said of adults say they are online, quote, almost constantly. Once out of bed, you check your phone every 4.3 minutes. A study done on American college students for how long they pay attention to anything, they put a tracking software on their computer and monitored what they did in a typical day. Students would switch tasks every 65 seconds, and the median amount of time they focus on any one thing was just 19 seconds. Can I tell you, as a preacher, that's a very discouraging statistic. To know that in the 30 minutes we have, you're going to check in and out about 25 times. Around 40% of young adults 18 to 22 said, I am addicted to technology. And one study found that technology distraction caused a drop in workers' IQ by an average of 10 points. Listen to this. That's twice the knock on your IQ than if you smoked weed. So as someone from Colorado, I completely get that. So just kidding, just kidding. But for tech companies, your distraction and your attention span is their opportunity. So there's a guy by the name of Asa Raskin who invented what is now known as the infinite scroll. You know what this is, right? You just scroll, and you don't have to go from page to page. It's called the infinite scroll. The infinite scroll conservatively makes you, listen to this, makes you spend 50% more time on social media sites than if you didn't have it. And all of this has now created a phrase that is called the attention economy. That large social media companies, technology companies, what they're after is your attention, and that's how they sell advertising dollars. So when it comes to Meta or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, you are not the consumer, you're the product. You're what they're selling. Your attention is what they're selling. And if you've never seen a video documentary called The Social Dilemma, It's a great watch, something that you should watch with your family. One of the guys in the documentary, his name is Tristan Harris. He used to work for Facebook, and here's what he says. You can try having self-control, but there are 1,000 engineers on the other side of the screen working against you. So that's where we are. That's our reality, and it's not changing, and it's not going away. So here's where I want to make it practical. So how has this impacted us in personal ways? So I want to talk about some ways that technology is impacting your ability to pay attention. Attention is one of the most valuable things that you have. A woman by the name of Simone Weil, many years ago, a French woman, made this statement. Attention is the only faculty of the soul that gives you access to God. Attention is the only faculty of the soul that gives you access to God. So we better pay attention to what we're paying attention to. And so I want to mention 5 ways that technology impacts your ability to pay attention. First, it impacts your ability to pay attention to ourselves. We are losing the ability to be quiet and alone with just our thoughts. To just be alone with our thoughts. This has huge implications for guys like me who preach, for the depth of your prayer life, for you to experience think time and creativity. In the book, The Shallows, Nicholas Carr says, in the choices we've made, consciously or not, about how we use our computers, we have rejected the intellectual tradition of solitary, single-minded concentration. Well, let me say that in a simpler, more concise way. We have an attraction to distraction. So there was this funny study that was done at the University of Virginia about noise and stimulation. And so they wanted to see how long people could sit by themselves and do nothing. And so they put them in a room, and in this room, there's a table, and on the table is a buzzer. And prior to coming in the room, they had them push the same buzzer, but it was outside the room, so that they could feel the shock that the buzzer would give them when they pushed it. Now, it was enough that it wouldn't damage them, but it was enough of a shock that it was painful. So they put them in the room, and all that's in the room is one chair, a table, and the buzzer sitting on the table. Nothing on the walls, nothing to read, no computers, no phones. And they were waiting to see just how long it would be before people would actually go, I can't stand the silence anymore, and they would push the buzzer even though it would be painful. Well, here's the result of the study. 1/4 of all the women in the study chose in the allotted time, rather than to sit quietly, they would rather experience the pain of the buzz rather than just sit there by themselves. 1/4. You want to know how many men did it? Not all of them, but 2/3 of all the men chose to shock themselves rather than sit there and be bored. Now listen, the point of that is not that women are smarter than men. All right, I know that's what you're thinking. But the point is, we don't know how to just be alone with ourselves, to be quiet any longer. I remember when I first started getting convicted about this, I was traveling a lot back in those days, and so I would park my car at a place called Canopy, and then I would take the shuttle over to the Denver terminal, and it's about a 10-minute ride. Well, this was one winter morning. It was very early in the morning, and so I'm thinking, like, I'm working at, like, managing my technology. So I put my phone in my coat pocket, and I decided I was going to leave it there the entire 10 minutes from the car place all the way to the terminal. I can't tell you 5, 6, 12, I don't know, times in that 10 minutes, my instinctive reflex was to reach for the phone in my pocket. And then I would put it back in. And I looked around the shuttle. Every single person at 5:30 in the morning has their head buried in their phone as we go. We don't know how to be alone with ourselves. It's also impacted your ability to read. We no longer read deeply. What now the neuroscientists say is we scan and decode, because there's so much information coming at us. We don't allow ourselves to absorb deeply what we're reading. So one, it impacts your ability to pay attention to yourself. Secondly, it impacts your ability to pay attention to God. Maybe Psalm 46:10 are the 8 words that are the biggest indictment of our culture. Be still and what? Know that I am God. Be still and know that I'm God. No wonder I can't really have a meaningful time of prayer. No wonder I can't experience solitude. No wonder silence drives us crazy. And so my ability to connect with God is deeply impacted by my inability to pay attention to anything very long. Thirdly, it impacts our ability to pay attention to our work. There was an ancient philosopher who said to do 2 things at once is to do neither. Now, what we've learned scientifically is we know that multitasking doesn't work. There are very few people who can actually multitask. Most of us do what is called task switching. So in fact, at the University of Stanford, they did a study in 2009 where they took 262 students and they put them into 2 groups, low multitaskers and high multitaskers. And then they did some studies where they were trying to determine if there was a difference in their productivity, and they assumed that the high multitaskers would be more productive, but that was not the conclusion at all. In fact, the conclusion of the study said, it turns out that high multitaskers are suckers for irrelevancy. And Steve Uzzell says this even better. Multitasking is merely the opportunity to screw up more than one thing at a time. I can relate. But the truth is, our productivity is decreasing because we can't pay attention, because we can't focus, because we can't concentrate. So fourthly, it's also impacting our ability to pay attention to our relationships. One of the things I constantly challenge teams with is don't be distracted from the person who is there by the person who isn't there. I love when I go to the Gospels and you look at the life of Jesus. He just never seems distracted, preoccupied. He doesn't look past people. When he's with someone, it feels like he's fully engaged and he is with them. He was incarnational. I'm so glad that in eternity past, when God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit were talking about, human history and how this was all going to play out, that Jesus did not say, I think it'd be a lot easier rather than me actually going through all the trouble of becoming human flesh and living on the earth. And could we just do a webinar and stream this whole thing like that? But there was something about incarnation in the flesh presence that was important. And again, we have dehumanized communication so that now people can hide behind a screen and they will say things in a nasty email or a social media post that you would never say to someone face to face, right? And so it's impacting our relationships. We feel it at home. Our kids feel it. Too often, when I'm teaching teams, I'll say to them, one of my cardinal rules for team health is this: you never deliver bad news by email or text message. When you have to deal with a difficult thing, you got to sit down, be face to face, and be in front of people. And then the last thing I would mention is it also impacts our ability to pay attention to moments. Moments that we miss because we're distracted by our devices, like a beautiful sunset, a rich conversation with a friend, a teachable moment with your child, or just sitting in reflection and gratitude for the goodness of God. I mean, how many moments do we miss? And everybody's, instead of experiencing the moment, we're always trying to capture it, right? Or take a selfie with it. Or I remember reading in Stolen Focus, he talks about that people go to see the Mona Lisa, and he says, no one's looking at the Mona Lisa. They've got their back turned to the Mona Lisa, and they're taking a selfie with the Mona Lisa. So instead of enjoying the moment of the beauty of one of the greatest pieces of art in the world, we're just worried about capturing it so we can post it on social media. So let me finish by taking the last 6 or 7 minutes and talk about, all right, Lance, what do I do about this? How do we take the reins in our lives so that it's better for us, our families, and for our spiritual lives? So let me give you some thoughts. Number one is know yourself and your tendencies. Know yourself and your tendencies. When you think about this last week, what are some of your habits or patterns that lead to unhealthy practices with your technology? So I like to think of myself as very organized. My family calls me OCD, which doesn't sound as nice. But like, I don't know how many of you are this way, but I like to keep my emails in my inbox as close to zero as possible. How many of you are like that? Yeah. How many of you just don't care? Like you've got hundreds, maybe thousands. Yeah. You people have a sickness. But I remember way back, now this is many years ago, but if you don't turn off the notification and you have like iMail and a new email comes in, there would be a little red badge that would let you know, hey, a new email has come in. Well, for someone who's wired like me, that's like crack cocaine. Like I can't not, like I have to go and see what's going on, and because Amazon might be having a new, Prime sale that I need to know about, right? And so I'm playing whack-a-mole with my email all the time. And then I learned out that I could turn off my notifications. And so my tendency is I don't like having email. I don't like having text messages, just this long, bunch of text messages on my phone. That drives me crazy. So that's a tendency for me. So let me tell you one funny story. Back when I traveled a lot, I would get a lot of upgrades. And so I remember one day I'm sitting next to this guy on the plane, and he's got a Mac, and I've got a Mac, and I look over at his little email thing at the bottom, and he hadn't turned off his notification, and he had the badge, and he had I could tell it was a lot of unread emails. And so anyway, he gets up to go to the bathroom. He leaves his computer on his little tray there, and so I'm thinking, I gotta know. So I lean over and I look, he's got 17,423 unread emails. And I just start hyperventilating right there because I just can't even imagine what that would be like to let that happen. And so my point is not that I have issues, okay? My point is, where is it that when you examine your life and how you use technology, where are some unhealthy patterns? All right, think about that for a moment. And if you can't think, just ask the person sitting next to you. They'll be able to help you out. All right, let me give you a second practical idea. I think some of us need to have a really honest conversation with our spouse or our team members or people at the office and say to them, hey, I want to manage my technology in a healthy way. And when you see me doing things that are disrespectful or disruptive, I want you to throw the penalty flag. I want us to do this in a way that is healthy, so I want to get better at this, so help me. And by the way, there are some things that you can do, which really leads to the third practical idea I have, which is be intentional to create space and distance from your technology. Like, for example, you may want to consider giving your phone a Sabbath. That when you're on Sabbath, why don't you put your phone on Sabbath? Or there's a device now, are you familiar with this? It's called K-Safe. So K-Safe was originally designed to help people who were trying to lose weight. And the idea was that you would take your Doritos or your Oreos and you would put them in this thing and you could lock it so that you couldn't get in the safe for a day or several hours or whatever. You get to determine how long you want to keep it in there. Well, now a K-Safe has been created for your technology so that when you want to focus on something, you want to have a date night with your spouse, or you want to work on a project for work, that you put it in the K-Safe and you can't get to it for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 hours. There's some apps that will help you. So there's an app called Freedom and there's an app called OneSec that you set parameters around your desire to focus on something, and it will keep your technology at bay until you are ready to re-engage it. So what is it that you might need to do to create some space? And we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a moment. But here's the next one. Establish some personal boundaries and guidelines for how you use technology. It might be good for you and your family. Sit down and have a conversation and go, okay, here's some guidelines. Here's how we're going to do technology around here. So I just wrote down a few thoughts. Like, for you personally, how often are you going to check email? Some people have a guideline. They go, hey, twice a day at the start of my day and more toward the end of my workday, I check email, rather than like Lance playing whack-a-mole all day long. Maybe you should limit how much time or how often you engage social media. Putting your phone in a different room from where you sleep. Everybody in the family putting their phones up during dinner so that we're not distracted. You don't pick up your phone in the mornings until after you have spent time with Jesus. You put your phone to bed every night at a certain time. Just some ways that you can go, how do I do this so that I am not controlled by technology, but rather I have control over it? And then the last thought I just want to mention is having a really honest conversation with family and friends. That if you're really going to take this seriously, you're probably going to need to do something radical. Like, I remember I had a friend one time, and he made this statement to me that I've never forgotten. He said, if you want to really make a significant change, you don't tweak yourself, tweak your way there. You have to make a radical shift. And I would say for some of us, when it comes to technology, because of how much it consumes our lives, we can't tweak our way to better health. We're going to have to make a radical shift. So I want to use an example from the Greek mythology, Homer's Odyssey. And Homer tells of an especially perilous section of the ocean. And as a ship was passing this section, the sirens, these seductive voices, would call to people on the ships and lead them to eventually drown themselves by casting themselves into the water. And they would follow these voices into the water. And Ulysses was trying to figure out a way to defeat these seductive distractions and voices. And so he comes up with this plan that before they would get to that section of the ocean, that the people on the crew would tie him to the mast so that he was unable to move, so that he couldn't be seduced, and so that he wasn't able to destroy himself by jumping in the water. And my point is that you might need to do something pretty radical. You might need to put some guidelines into place, and that you can begin to take ground by making some radical changes in your use of technology. So here's how I want to wrap up. If you have the handout, I'm going to ask you to take a couple of minutes to think about this, and I want you to write down one way that you have a technology practice that has an unhealthy grip on you, all right? So think about that for just a moment. As you think about all of your engagement and your life connected to your devices, what is one area where you go, that's an issue for me? This has everything to do with your spiritual life and health. Your ability to be with Jesus, to pay attention, to pray, to be alone with your thoughts, has everything to do with how well you manage your devices. So not only is it just good for us in life, but even in terms of just your personal connection to Jesus, this really does matter. And it is worth fighting for us to have some boundaries around some of this stuff. So thank you for making the time to stay here a little extra after church, and we'll let you get back to the blizzard now. So, and don't forget to pray for the Broncos. Okay.